Welcome to Quaderno Academy, empowering excellence through education. Join us as we inspire growth and unleash your potential. Let's dive in.
You know, that crazy rapid growth, it's what every company dreams of, right? But what happens when that dream actually comes true and becomes, well, kind of overwhelming? Today, we're going to talk about how to navigate that massive ocean of success by, believe it or not, focusing on the tiny, detailed world of a tide pool. All right, let's jump in. Think about the ocean for a second. It's just immense, right? So mysterious and mostly unknown. I mean, get this, over 80% of it is still unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. It's the perfect metaphor for something huge that we just don't fully understand. And that's kind of the whole point here. Just like the ocean, the hidden dangers of massive, unchecked growth are also really misunderstood. When a company gets too big, too fast, it can start to feel anonymous, overwhelming, not just for the customers, but for the very people who work there. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at the problem, which we're calling the ocean of insignificance. Then we'll dig into the universal pattern of all growth with the S-curve paradox. After that, we'll get into the solution with 3 tide pool leadership principles, and we'll wrap it all up with a really powerful personal choice called feeding the right wolf. So first things first, let's really define this problem. What actually happens when all that success starts making you feel, well, insignificant? This whole idea really comes from a personal story. So picture this. You're at your company's big annual meeting. There are over 1,200 people in this massive conference hall. You're sitting way in the back row looking out at this literal sea of colleagues. In that kind of moment, it's so easy to feel like a tiny drop in this huge ocean and to start wondering, how am I even making a difference here? Does my work even matter? And that feeling, that's not just in your head. It points to some really serious dangers for the organization. When people feel invisible, their connection to the mission just fades. And in a giant sea of employees, it becomes way too easy for everyone to assume someone else will handle it. That's when you start hearing that dreaded phrase, "That's not my job." So how does a company even get to this point? Well, to understand that, we need to look at the actual mathematics of growth itself. So check this out. This is what that crazy growth looks like on a chart. Maybe this shows your company just skyrocketing past the competition. I mean, it's an amazing ride, right? You're bringing in new assets, big investors are calling, the stock price is through the roof. Everything seems perfect. But what's really fascinating is what this chart doesn't show you. It turns out that pretty much every living thing, whether it's an organism, a company, or even an empire, follows this predictable pattern. It's called the S-curve. You have this period of slow, hard work and building. Then you get that incredible rapid growth we just saw. But, and this is so important, if you don't change anything, that peak is always followed by decline. It's basically a law of nature. And this leads us to the big paradox. The moment you're at the top of your game, when everything is going perfectly, that is the exact moment you have to figure out what's next. Your gut tells you, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the S-curve is screaming at you that that's the absolute worst thing you can do. You have to innovate right at the peak of your success. So what's the answer? How do you break that cycle? Well, you have to completely shift your perspective. You stop looking at the vast, overwhelming ocean, and instead you choose to focus on a single tide pool. It's like a micro-ocean, a small, interconnected world where you can actually see all the little details and how every single piece works together. Okay, so let's get practical. How do you actually lead from the tide pool? What does that even look like? The first principle is all about getting truly curious. There's this great story about an oceanography class where the professor saw a student running from one tide pool to the next, just kind of glancing at each one. He stopped her and said, just sit with one. And when she did, when she really focused, it was like magic. Suddenly, she saw the tiny barnacles opening, the little fish hiding, a whole universe that she had completely missed just by scanning the surface. And man, that is such a perfect metaphor for how we work, right? Think about it. Do we really listen to our teammates, especially when their ideas are different from ours? Or do we just kind of scan the surface and dismiss them? Real curiosity means listening to understand, not just waiting for our turn to talk. All right, principle number 2, creating a safe place for people to be vulnerable. Tide pools are incredibly exposed. When the tide is out, they're baked by the sun. When the tide comes in, they're slammed by waves. but they thrive. Why? Because they're protected by the rocks all around them. As leaders, our job is to be those rocks. We have to protect our people. And a really great way to think about this comes from the Japanese philosophy of wabi sabi. It's this beautiful idea of finding beauty in imperfection. It teaches us that our cracks, our scars, they aren't flaws we need to hide. No, they're evidence of our journey. They're what make us resilient. But let's be real for a second. Being vulnerable is hard. The speaker shared a story about being a little kid who had to wear these clunky corrective shoes and just feeling so dorky and insecure. And look, those feelings don't just magically disappear when you become an adult. For a lot of us, letting our guard down is tough, which is exactly why creating that safe, protected space is probably the most important job a leader has. And that brings us to our final principle, driving innovation from the edge. A tide pool is an amazing place because it exists right on the boundary, on the edge between two completely different worlds, the land and the sea. This constant pressure from both sides forces the creatures inside to constantly adapt and innovate just to stay alive. You know, there's actually a scientific term for this. In ecology, it's called the edge effect. The boundary between two ecosystems is always the place with the most diversity, the most creativity, and the most new life. And the same exact thing is true in our work and in our lives. When we're pushed to the edge, when different ideas and different teams collide, that's where the real magic happens. But here's the thing, being pushed to the edge is tough. The author Jim Collins talks about something called the hardiness factor. When we face a huge challenge, we basically have three choices. 1, we can become permanently dispirited, we basically give up. 2, we can just go back to normal, pretending it never happened. Or, and this is the game changer, we can use that challenge to come out stronger than we were before. It all comes down to a choice. And that leads us to the final and maybe the most important piece of this puzzle. Because in the end, how we respond to growth, to vulnerability, to being on the edge, it all comes down to a very simple, very personal choice. It all comes down to an old Cherokee story about a chief teaching his grandson. He says, there's a fight going on inside of me. It's a terrible fight between two wolves. One wolf is evil. It represents anger, greed, and ego. The other wolf is good. It's joy, peace, humility, and kindness. And the chief tells him, this same fight is going on inside of you, and inside of every other person too. So the grandson, he thinks about this for a moment, and then he asks his grandfather the obvious question we're all thinking, which wolf is going to win? And the chief's answer is so simple, but so profound. He just says, the one you feed. Ultimately, navigating the giant ocean of growth isn't about some grand corporate strategy. It's about the small choices we make every single day, to be curious, to be the rock for someone else, to innovate, and to feed the part of ourselves that wants to build and connect. So the only question left is, which wolf are you going to feed today?
Brought to you by Quaderno KO. Learn smarter, not harder.